Hello, welcome back to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swenson Ridley, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Jessica Tietjen, who is Vice President and General Counsel of Experitech Inc., which is, she's also a Gallup Certified Strengths Coach, was recognized as a Gallup Top 10 Manager of the Year nominee in 2020, and is an Experitech three-time winner of the Gallup Exceptional Workplace Award. She's graduated from law school. She's worked as the VP at Experitech. She's also a wife and mom to 3 children, including twin 2-year-olds, and has done tons of work in the realm of female leadership and balancing the whole career, being in a male-dominated world, and just figuring out life. So Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I am excited for this conversation, even though it's less like zoned in on the health and wellness world. It's, this around balance and how we really find our authentic selves inside of a male dominated world, I think is really important to our health. So I'm excited to dive into that with you. But before we start down that road, I'd love to hear just, what's brought you to where you are in life, because obviously you've achieved a lot and are doing big things.
So I actually joined my organization because they were going through an acquisition at the time. So I came in to help with the legal side of it. After law school, but the companies were growing really quickly after the acquisition, and they had a need in the kind of HR talent management space. They didn't really have anything in that space historically. So ultimately I did a pivot and chose to move into kind of a talent management. I would think my first title was talent development coordinator. And then over the last 10, 11 years, I have just expanded. So, I started with just talent management. I took on our IT department. I took on our marketing, our customer service, our order management, and our project coordination team. So kind of all the supporting functions in the organization, in addition to keeping legal and kind of the HR functions. And so I've just kind of slowly added onto my plate over the years. And like you mentioned, I also got married and had 3 kids during that time period. And the thing that I'm like the most passionate about, that kind of led me to this conversation in general, is around helping people, and especially women, find that exceptional work-life experience. And I believe that if you aren't doing well at both, they both suffer. So they both impact each other so closely, and I've seen that so much with the women that work for me. And so that's just really a passion of mine, is to try to create not just the exceptional work experience, but also the life experience, because you need both to be successful in both.
Absolutely. And I think it's, I found for myself, I don't really want to call it a pitfall, but it's like, we tell ourselves, we can't really have it all. Like we have to give to one, and, inevitably we take away from the other. And so it's kind of like this pendulum that swings. And I love this idea of, just finding the balance between the two. Because I know for myself, I struggled at times. Like I started my chiropractic practice when my son was, just to give kind of my story, and then we'll dive into this. My son, he was 6 weeks old when I started my business, and my marriage was really rocky. I ended up going through a divorce. So I built this nearly 7-figure business, as a single mom. And I was really busy. I worked 68, 80 hours a week, and other people kind of raised him in the early years. Like I had an in-office nanny, but, and I hated parts of that, but I also found a way to make it work, because I recognized in myself that like I needed to work. I was never going to be happy as a stay-at-home mom. And I know you can, and I'm sure there's lots of women who feel that as well listening to this. And, so it's acknowledging that side of ourselves, and then finding that balance, so that we're not feeling guilty, or like we're a terrible mom, or we're a terrible, employer or worker, like whatever, in our role. So what advice or what things can you add to, those who are still, because I feel like it's a daily struggle, and I'm constantly like bringing awareness to my choices, and I could literally work all day long and just have fun doing that, but I have to engage with my kid too.
Yeah.
So what tips can you bring to us for like starting down that road to just finding that exceptionalness in both?
Yeah. So I think I'm the same way, and I always say that I make a much better mom when I work all day because I'm more interested in playing with my kids than when I'm trying to be with my kids all day. So we have a much happier, healthier relationship because the I can really be focused on the play when I'm with them, and engaging with them in that way. And so that's really where I come from it. I do a lot in strengths because I've worked with Gallup, and I'm a certified strength coach, and finding what you enjoy, and how you can take who you are and connect with your children, and connect that to the activities that you do with your children is kind of the secret sauce, I think, to really finding meaningful interactions there that make it so that you're more pulled to spend that time with your children, and that you're realizing, okay, this is good, valuable time. For me, one of my strengths is maximizer. I like things to be great. I like to make things great. So I really focus on helping my kids develop great skills, and so that they can be growth minded and they can, think a certain way. So I kind of use some of my skills and the things that I like at work with my kids. And then that draws me to those interactions. So that's one of the strategies I really use to your question, to pull me kind of out of the work world and into time with my kids.
I love that. And it's been interesting. A lot of the women I've been coaching recently, some of them have like families of 7 or, just a lot of kids. And at a certain point, especially when you hit the teenage years, I think that knowing those personality differences and like their strengths as well as your strengths
Mm,
make all the difference in having
yeah.
like a less stressful home
Mhm.
experience. I've got teenage stepsons that, it's taken me a while to get to know them, to like be able to speak to them in a way that it lands well, and it doesn't always still, but
Right.
so I think that's a great tip. And a lot of those skills, like especially those of us in the work world, those things that we learn about, being part of a team, managing a team, like leading other people, we can completely apply it at home. And I think that's a really great way to just like continue to practice and still have that connection to our own drive and growth. And
Yeah.
cool. So I really like that. Um, and what have you found? We can keep talking about the work life balance. Like how, so one of the things I've struggled with a lot is like I'll get so pulled into a project, or especially being an entrepreneur, it's like there's times where like you just have to work and it's hard to shut that off. So what tips do you have? Like I like bringing part of work like into your relationship with your kid, in that realm. But is there any other things that have helped you, like be done with work when you get home so that you can connect?
Yeah. I think that is an extremely big challenge, and it has been worse over the last year. I've had employees who've worked for me, nursing babies during meetings, kids on their laps. Like we've been through kind of all of that where it's really hard to separate the two. One of the things that I've worked really hard to do is to like designate when it's kid focused time and when it's work focused time. Now my kids are pretty young, so for me, when they get home from school or daycare, until they go to bed, it's about 2.5 hours of time. So that window is kind of their window, and I, even if I'm not done with work, I stop doing that work and I will come back to it later, and sacrifice, maybe my time rather than the time that I have for my kids. So, that is really kind of the boundary, the boundary that I use, to balance it. The other thing I tell my team a lot, because I think there's the pull into work, but then there's also the pull of family and the fear of not doing enough at work or not meeting those expectations. And one of the things that I think is really hard for women to learn and engage with is acknowledging that it's about the results, not all of the time that is put in, and recognizing that in most cases, and I see this with my female employees all the time, you could get really good at getting things done in less time. And so, so if you can do that, don't assume you've got to put in a whole bunch of extra time just because all of our male counterparts aren't necessarily doing that. They might be doing email late at night, but it may be to avoid bedtime, not because they actually need to be doing, email at that time.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into this because I think this is a really interesting conversation. Is just the differences between men and women in the workplace and in how we approach leadership and our roles and all this. Because I know I learned a lot. I've had two males who worked for me, and one of them's continued to share space with me, but no longer directly works for me. And it's just it's really different. I have to say. So, being a female in more of a male, it sounds like you have quite a few female employees. Am I
I
understanding?
have a number who work for me. So because I'm in a lot of the supporting functions, I have quite a few women who work for me. But also have my team manager who is a male who works for me. But the bulk, I mean, my organization is 75% men, and all of the leadership team except for me are men.
So let's talk about you and your rise into that role that you've created for yourself. Because I think we can get into that whole thing. One of my like big passions is transforming the conversation of like male and female inequality and, especially across pay structure and like maternity leave and all that stuff. But that's like, we're getting bigger than what we need to talk about here. But, for you, because I also work with a lot of women and a lot of women who listen to the show are in leadership roles. They're, either entrepreneurs or they're leading an organization similar to you. So just kind of share your journey of what it was like to, rise into that position while getting married and having kids and still being a woman.
Yeah, so I mean, so my kids are pretty young, like my son's 5. So I was very much in the vice president leadership role prior to having kids, which um, through the whole process I regretted. Not because regretted having my kids, but wishing I'd had them before I got to that point, because it is really hard and it is really challenging. And so navigating leadership meetings, I'd have to leave to go pump, and call back in, and all just the crazy things that you have to go through that no one else on the leadership team really has any experience or even understanding of,
Mhm.
is just really really tough. And so I think I learned a lot and have a lot of empathy now for women in the workplace. And after I went through a lot of what I went through, I put in some things internally to try to change our practices. So, for example, we put in an additional 2 weeks of paid leave for our male employees, actually, for parental leave, because I was adamant about, after having my son, every man should be home for the first 2 weeks with his wife. Like, they need to be there. And I remember my male counterparts, my other leadership team members saying, what if he doesn't want to be there? And I was like, I don't care. He needs to be. And so we're going to give that time off. And I can't tell you the number of male employees and their spouses who've said like that has made just a huge difference in their family life, just being there for those first 2 weeks without having to think about work. So I think for me, like, to answer your question, I think the learning and going through that myself has helped me to see where practices and policies and decisions that we make as an organization, that really, as women leaders, we're the only ones in a position to advocate for those changes. And so it's important that we do, even at the risk of getting into some of the conflicts that you inevitably have as you make those change, or as you bring those changes.
Yeah. No, I love, like, just in hearing you talk about that, that is like something that no male would probably ever think to bring to the table, right? Like that's just, it's not part of their reality, their vocabulary at all. My husband works, he's the CFO of a multi-million dollar nonprofit organization up here, but it's just like, in talking to him about some of the stuff, it's so male dominated and just, like family is kind of that thing that's at home that they don't really, think about. Whereas it sounds like you're creating more of that culture of having family like be acknowledged. And
Well, and I think in that instance too, one of the reasons I did that was there's a lot of research that shows that if fathers are there in those first 2 weeks, it has a long-term impact. So their comfort level with the babies, their involvement, all of those things. So to me, it's both a good personal decision, but a good business decision because the more that their family functions help in a healthy way, the more that they're healthy in that engagement with their kids, the better long term employee they're going to be, the better there's going to be fewer negative impacts in the long term. So to me, there's a good business case there. You just have to kind of get your head around it and think about how do you bring that different perspective. The same thing kind of came up with having female employees who want to work remotely longer, which obviously now because of the pandemic, we kind of make that point is more moot. But historically, there was this resistance to, being remote. And I don't think they all realized, and at one point, I actually pumped, for my twins in meetings. I had the ones that like, can go in your bra, and I pumped standing up in front of a room, doing training, sitting in leadership meetings. And, and I said to them, like later on, I said, it was so much easier for me to feed 2 babies and still talk to you all than having to do all that pumping. And so I took leadership calls while feeding both my twins at the same time, responding to conversation on the phone. And to me, that's serious dedication and commitment. And if I'm not, there in face, that's a minor trade-off for the commitment that women can bring when they're willing to do that, when they're willing to engage at that level.
yeah, I'm just picturing you standing in front of a room with bumps on. That's amazing.
Oh my God, I
Love
was
it.
so nervous. But the LV pump, it's like super quiet and you can't tell. And I was so nervous the first time I did it. But I was like, okay, I don't have a choice. Like I have to, like, or I can't get through this training or I won't be in this meeting. Like I don't have a choice. So I just put it on and I did it. And I didn't tell them till later. And I was like, yeah, I pumped through that whole meeting.
Okay.
So and they've gotten more comfortable with it now too. I had one of my all my female employees have had babies recently. So one of them, we were doing a talent review and she goes, I got to turn the camera off. I got to feed Charlie. And so she like turns her camera off. She's feeding her son, just keeps going. And so we're kind of changing the norm of what to expect over time in our organization.
Yeah. And I love that, like, not that it's all about you, but you've kind of been the driving force to just bring this more female centric version of leadership and making it all work. Like, because I was my own boss, I had a 3-hour lunch, and that was when we nursed. And because I nursed my son for 2.5 years. And, we nursed, we took a nap, we did what we needed to do. Patients were fine waiting if I had to
Right.
feed the baby quick, or, and I just kind of made it work, and it was just part of our culture. And so you're really describing like a great office culture that's becoming more accepting and more of fulfilling for a female to work there. Like, your organization sounds
Well,
awesome.
and I don't think it happened. I don't think, and that's where I said, not to make it about me again, but there's nobody else in a position to bring that perspective or drive that change. Nobody else, can take that risk to this in the same way. And so I kind of feel like as women leaders, we like have to take those risks. Like
Yeah.
we have to be willing to lean in and say the right things at the right time because the guys in the room aren't, like they're just not even going to think about it.
Yeah. And that's a really important point, because I meet so many women leaders who are just so afraid to, like, even in leadership roles, we can be afraid to speak up. We worry about saying the wrong thing, or how's it going to be taken, or think that things just are never going to change, but they can, and you're proof of that. And I love that. That's super inspiring. So
Yeah, you got to whittle away at it though.
yeah,
Like have this conversation, have this, and it's one step forward, and just kind of keep progressing it.
I love it. And let me ask you this question, because we're talking about this. So how do you lead with courage and vulnerability, and I would say authenticity, because you're staying true to female self as well through all of this. So like what's the key there?
Yeah, I would say so. This is something that has been a challenge. It's taken a time to get to that point, because early on I struggled with feedback. I struggled with you know with how I was perceived, or how successful I was being. And I actually got feedback on one of my employee surveys early on, where there was a lack. They indicated like my level the level of trust wasn't as high as it needed to be, and that hit me really, really hard at the time. And it took me a while to come back and say, okay, but I've got to be vulnerable enough to say, okay, but that's real. And what am I doing that's causing that? And what do I need to change about myself instead of just about the people that work for me? And so I've, worked really hard to try to, be willing to share those things, those, vulnerable moments, and to come from a place of, this is my experience, rather than a place of you have to think like I do, but just trying to explain my experience or my perspective. And I found that the more that I do that, the more that I open the door, the more that the people that work, for me, but with me, do the same. And we trust each other, and we can engage in a much more productive, conversation, and the outcomes are much better. So it kind of reinforces itself as you start to make progress.
Yeah. And I know that first step is scary, but I believe, what you just described is true leadership. Like we have to be willing to be vulnerable and to not like I had a office manager that was very black and white, like lorded it over everybody, like you do this because I say so. There's like nothing like me. And I'm like, that's not leadership. That's bullying. This
Mhm.
is, you have to, and it can be scary, but when you do, you know, bring some vulnerability to it, like put yourself out there in that kind of a way, people are automatically drawn into that. And I think you create the culture and the climate where you can have change, where you can have conversations that, move things forward. So that's really cool. And for anyone listening, if so I coach a lot of women through like they're either afraid of making change, or they're afraid of how they'll be perceived, or they're afraid of, you know, if it's even worth doing something, saying something, any like if it's just going to fall on dead ears. And it might, but you have to be willing to do what you need to do to start the conversation anyways. So
Yeah, and I don't think you get rid of the fear. So I don't think, to me that I'm gonna still experience that. I'm still gonna go through, I love Brene Brown's like shame storm,
yeah,
terminology. I'm still gonna go through that. Um, but I am going to do it willingly because I know that I need to. And I don't necessarily have, obviously all the answers, but I think you're dead on that women, that fear of judgment and that fear of how you'll be, perceived. And I think the thing that I noticed, or am noticing, maybe I'm more in the middle of it, is that um, it's not that the men in the room don't also have that same experience. They just hide it very well and move right through it. And so don't sacrifice your own confidence and your own, ability to bring that courage or to make that statement and automatically assume it's not going to go anywhere. It can.
yeah, absolutely. And it just takes a willingness to jump.
Yeah.
More, yeah. So any last thoughts or tips for women who are either struggling with courage or trying to find that balance to make it, especially like 2020 2021 has been like total chaos for everybody. My son finally went back to school and I'm like hallelujah. But just finding that balance where like it's okay to be working mom, it's okay to have be a leader, it's okay to let our selves be vulnerable in some way, in that environment. Like any last tips that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, women, you're going, like, as a woman in the workplace, you're gonna go through that experience. So like, I think the first is just like being gentle with yourself going through it, is saying, okay, I'm going to have days where I feel like I'm abandoning my children, and I'm going to have days where I feel like I'm failing at work, but then trying to figure out the strategies that reduce those times. And so really, I think paying attention to the moments where that happens, where you feel either like you're not doing good enough at work or you're not doing good enough at home, and then going through, okay, why is that, and what is causing that feeling, and is it real? Because I think a lot of times it's not real. It's just a self-conscious response, and actually we're doing a great job, maybe even a better than great job,
Yeah,
and at both, and we're just hard on ourselves because we want to be better, or we want to push more, and there's doubt there. So I think there's that, and trusting in ourselves. And then I also think when it comes to work, the most important thing is to keep really good track of your progress and what you're accomplishing, so that if there's ever a doubt about what you're getting done, how you're getting it done, how effective you are, you can reassure yourself and others, of what it is you're getting done. I think sometimes we move so fast we forget everything that we're doing, and we don't give ourselves credit for it. So I think that is a really good exercise, to whatever, using whatever system works, to really keep track of what those things are that you're accomplishing, so that when those moments happen, you can point to that.
absolutely. And that's such a common thing, especially with over high achieving women.
Yeah.
We're just like next, and it's like, oh wait, but you did this huge project, or you got this huge thing done, or like, and I'm constantly like, do something for yourself. And another thing you brought up, when you're feeling off kilter in either place, or maybe it's both at the same time, like look at self-care. That's the other thing. Sometimes we
Mhm.
need to actually take some time for ourselves in order to be a better mom and a better employee and a better business owner. And that's actually like, it took me a really long time to frame this way, but when I take care of myself, it's actually working because it's doing, like, it's productive towards something, because it makes me a better mom and wife and um, doctor for the people I work with and coach and business owner. So
Yeah, I think with that too, you've got to find your version of that, because I've seen
yeah,
a lot of or I've had people tell me like, you need to take more baths, or you need to do whatever it is, and but that's not what works for me. That's not what what fills me up. And only recently, where I really started working on writing for my book, did I realize that that's really what's for me, because that's what makes me happy and gives me energy, and kind of rejuvenates me, and what it probably looks like work to other people, but to
right.
me, that's for me, that's for my my well-being, and what I enjoy. So I think everybody kind of has to learn what that is, and not assume that what works for somebody else is what you should be doing. I don't spend a lot of time with friends, or at cocktail hours, or doing things like that. That's just not in the scope of what's most important to me right now. And but I do make time for other things, that fit within in what's important to me.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm glad you brought up that distinction, because that reminded me of one other thing I was just wanted to touch on, and then we can talk about your book, because I know you're writing a book. But that is, what really works for us and what society dictates. Because I think a lot of our issues, especially as working moms, is like, there's still this society that thinks women should stay home and keep the house clean and all this stuff. And that I found so much freedom when I just let all that go. Like,
Yeah.
not like my house is a disaster, but like, hired somebody to help clean, and don't worry about if you don't finish all the dish. Like, with some of that stuff we have to let go of and stop attaching to like what everyone else says we should be doing, and really tune into what we need and what works for us, and just be okay with it.
Yeah, and I gotta add one thing onto that. Like,
Yeah.
I like to call it like the Facebook mom, that does all the like perfect made for picture moments. I can't do that. Like, that's the thing. I have those moments. Those moments happen. I don't catch them on camera. I don't make sure to post them. It looks messy. I've got my Friday night dance party, or whatever, but I don't have the pictures at the pumpkin patch. And, I'm lucky if we make it to a pumpkin patch. We probably won't. It's one of those, you got to do what works, what really, really works for you. One other thing that popped into my head there in terms of advice too, I think, is always take your maternity leave on that point with kids. Is always, if you have the leave, take it. Because with my first son, I went back after 6 weeks, and gosh, I still regret it to this day. And I even got that advice and I didn't listen to it, because I thought, oh, I want to be back. And I did want to be back, but I wasn't ready to be back. With my girls, that wouldn't have even been remotely feasible with twin girls. But take the time that you need. It's one time in your life, or a limited number of times in your life, that you make that sacrifice so that you can be there with your kids. So that's just something, when it comes to women in general, I really think that's important.
I agree. And I'm hoping someday they actually give us maternity leave in this country, not just based on a company, but like nationwide.
Yeah, no, well, I don't know if you watched Biden's speech last night, but like that was my big, like, oh, I hope that really happens. Like, we really need to have that. It's just, I have Canadian friends who get a whole year and they're like,
Yeah,
you only have 12 weeks. And I'm like, 12 weeks? Because our company does do paid for
we
12
actually
weeks.
have
And
zero. Yeah.
I was like, that's pretty good. Like 12 weeks paid is pretty good, actually. And they're like, what? Like, how can you even get back? You can't work after 12 weeks. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
different world.
Yeah. Literally every other country has about a year of paid time off. And if
Yeah.
you have twins, it's actually longer. I met a woman in Canada who was gonna, I think, take almost 2 years with her twins and be
Yeah.
paid.
Well, and my twins had health issues. So
Yeah.
my girls couldn't tolerate formula. So when I tried to give myself some break in terms of nursing, because it's hard to nurse twins, they got sick off of the formula. They had something called FPIES. And so when I tried to get back, I took 4 months for my twins. And when I tried to get back, I just kept failing, because I was still up all night. I was still feeding two babies. It was draining me. And the work that it took to get pump stuff together, to get back to where, I mean, it was a really, really tough time and a really, really tough process. And I think it's just, the flexibility needs to be there, because of how complicated it is, and because of those challenges that exist. And even me in my role, I worked for the CEO, and he said to me, when I asked for more flexibility, for continued flexibility, he said to me, well, what are we going to say to other employees that you're getting continued flexibility? And I looked at him dead in the eye and I said, we're going to say that I asked for a reasonable accommodation, because I did, because my girls have a health issue that's impacting me. And this is reasonable for me to be able to work from home a few days a week. Like, that's a reasonable accommodation. And he was like, okay, good. Sounds good. Like, so don't hesitate to like make the statement that I need that accommodation. It is reasonable.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, just share a little bit about this book that you're writing and when we can expect it out.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to get it out in the next 8 to 12 weeks. So I'm about a little more than halfway done, and I'm working with a publisher on it. It is about exceptional work and life experience. So how to achieve extraordinary performance in a challenging world, and how, if we can do those things, if we can look at our performance, and when I say performance, not just performance at work, but performance as mothers, as spouses, as leaders in our communities, and all the different roles that we serve. If we can think about and be consciously improving our performance in those areas, how it'll help us live an exceptional work and life experience. And that really the lessons we learned in 2020, and there are really good lessons in 2020, if we can process them and put them into work, that if we can move those forward, it is within our grasp probably more so now than ever before. Now that we know that, we can work remotely, and now that we know that we can do things differently than we did before, that doesn't have to continue to be the hurdle that it's been in the past. And so I really want to give people the tools that I found and the lessons that I've pulled from it, to say, anybody can do this and you can live a better life if you do it. So that's kind of my goal and my objective, and hope to have it here finished soon, and out for people to get.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it. And once it's done, I'll put links to where they can get it in the show notes. But
Awesome.
thank you so much for joining me and having this conversation that's just near and dear to my heart. So,
Yeah, me too.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. And is there any other way women can connect with you if they just felt a connection through what you shared?
Yeah, absolutely. I love for people to reach out on LinkedIn. I've also got a website out there, jessicatiejen.com. So anybody can message me through that as well. I put up articles periodically, either around challenges of women, or except around performance and work in life. So yep, you can reach out to me through either of those.
Awesome. I'll put those in the show notes. All right. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you also.